Hi, this is Prithpal Bogil. I'm a principal architect within Apigee's pre-sales team. Today, I'm going to be talking about how you can integrate to Okta. Okta is, as you know, one of the uh, very popular identity and access management solution. In this short segment today, I'm going to be showcasing Apigee's OAuth capabilities and essentially how we can integrate with Okta in a real life setting. I'm going to be focusing on the password grant flow in this segment, and I will be showcasing a very comprehensive demo which involves Apigee components, Okta components, and will showcase how you can use this kind of a design pattern in your production implementations. Okay, so let's get into it. So what is the problem statement that we're trying to solve? So in this case, the use case is that a given customer, it's an Apigee customer, they also happen to have Okta, but they have a desire to use Apigee as the OAuth provider for all their apps, right? As you know, Apigee Edge has a lot of out-of-the-box OAuth policies, essentially a full-blown OAuth server, and within minutes you can actually protect all your APIs using the OAuth capabilities built in Apigee. In this case, the desire is also to use Okta for user authentication, right? So this is where Okta is the identity store in this example. The use case is that the end user is using an app which is trying to authenticate a user against Okta, but all the calls are essentially flowing through Apigee, and then Apigee will delegate the calls to Okta when necessary. In doing so, the desire is to be able to have a very seamless experience from a consumption perspective and the ability to actually stick to standards as much as you can. In this case, in this demo, the app that I'm going to be simulating is going to be done using the Postman client, which will simulate API calls. So that's what we're going to be using here. So let's get right into the password grant flow. In this case, as you can see out here, I'm actually going to demonstrate two different variants. The first one is a very traditional password grant flow here, when the client, in this case, uh, the Postman client that I'm going to be using, makes an API call to Apigee Edge at a endpoint, which is the token endpoint, and and will send some of the information that is required for authentication. Within that call, Apigee will make a call out to Okta, passing in the user credentials. When Okta will then validate the credentials and either deny or grant access. And once a session is established on the Okta side, there are certain attributes which are returned from Okta. And then once the Apigee receives those, Apigee is able to mint an access token. And more importantly, it can associate many values or things or attributes that come back from Okta. Apigee has the ability to automatically persist those attributes and associate them with the access token that has been minted. At the end of the day, the access token goes back to the client, and then the client can present the access token to access any API that has been protected using OAuth. Okay, so that's one variant. In this case, Apigee is minting the token. It's a randomly generated opaque token, so on and so forth. We also have support for externalizing not only the authentication, as in this case, but you can also externalize the generation of the token. And what I mean by that is, let's say you want the token to actually be something which was generated in Okta. In this second example, we are going to take the session ID which was generated out there in Okta and then return that as the access token, right? That feature may be useful where you want potentially tokens minted out here within Okta, but you want all the traffic flowing through within Apigee, and then Apigee Edge has the ability to make it very seamless, whether Apigee is minting the token or we are actually minting the token based on some value from Okta. I'm going to show you those two flows. In this case, here are some of the steps that I'm actually going to be following as part of the demonstration. So again, there are certain assumptions out here that Apigee is a registered or a trusted client within Okta, uh, and that's what I would need to call when I call Okta. And then the ID and secret are stored out here within the Apigee vault. More importantly, as we go through the flow, client will call Apigee's endpoint, the token endpoint, passing the client ID, secret, username, password, etc. And then Apigee will make a call out to Okta, mint the token, and return that back. In the second variation, we will actually generate the token based on certain attributes from Okta. Okay, so let's get right into it. In my browser out here, let's first start with actually taking you to the Okta screen. So I'm logged into Okta out here. This is the Okta sandbox. You can see I'm already logged in here, and within Okta, you can see different options out here. If I click on admin, you can see the dashboard. I can see some activity of who's been logged in and whatnot. Let's go to the directory out here. The directory capability within Okta shows you the directory functionality within Okta shows you the list of users which are mastered and sourced within Okta. In this case, the test user, the pbogil plus Okta underscore test, that's the one I'm going to be using to assert the identity and let Okta authenticate that user. If I click on the test user, you will see that the user has out here certain profile information in here, some of which I will actually be returning back as part of the call to Okta. So this is the Okta screen out here. I'm going to hop over to the Apigee Edge user interface. This is the Apigee Edge management UI, as you can see out here. I have certain kinds of API proxies. Let's start off with showing you the employees API proxy. An employees API proxy is a very simple API proxy that I have within Apigee Edge, and essentially it queries an existing backend as a service. So Apigee BAS, or backend as a service, is a set of capabilities which provide a data store for mobile apps. You can query the data source. The data source is API enabled. In this case, I am leveraging the employees collection, which returns a set of employee records. So really, this endpoint could be anything. And this is the employees API that needs to be protected. And the way you start creating the groupings within this is you go within the Apigee interface, create an API product. A product is nothing but a grouping of certain kinds of APIs. You can see that within the employee silver product, which is what I'm going to be using for this demonstration, actually gives you access to employees and a bunch of other APIs. You can configure quotas, you can assign scopes to API products. So very, very powerful capabilities within the ecosystem of Apigee Edge. Uh, you also have the notion of an app. This is where the client ID and client secret is generated within Apigee, and this is effectively where a client gets access to a product, and by virtue of that, a client or the app itself will have access to the APIs which are contained within the product. Okay, so that's the first API that I'm going to be using. Some of the other APIs which I'm going to discuss here are the OAuth APIs, and these are the token endpoints which I'm going to be invoking to showcase the two different demo flow variations. So in the first one, we'll take a look at the OAuth EXT API proxy. This is the OAuth endpoint. Obviously, this one exposes a bunch of different flows. We're only going to be covering the password grant flow in here. So when the access token request endpoint is called, you can see that I have a few different policies that I'm using out here. So in the very first thing, I make a service call out to Okta. So you can see that I'm invoking the Okta endpoint out here, right? And the username password is going to be captured from the request which is made to this API. and that's going to be the test user and the test account that I just reviewed. In this case, it's going to be this account here. And then I make a call to Okta, and as part of that call, I get some data back from Okta. And so in this extract variables policy, you can see that I'm actually extracting a lot of that information which is coming back from Okta. Okta sends me back a JSON payload, and that's what I extract out of here. If something goes wrong in the authentication, we are leveraging a conditional raise fault policy out here, and this will actually raise a fault if the authentication with Okta fails. Assuming everything is successful, we can then use the OAuth extension policy out here. The access token OAuth policy is called OAuth v2, and within that we use the generate access token method. And you can see that more importantly, once the token is minted, all the attributes that I've received from Okta, I'm actually able to persist it and associate that with the token. So in this example, in the first one, I'm actually calling Okta, but the token is being minted within Apigee, completely randomly generated string, all happening within Apigee. In the second variant, I'll show that we're doing the same thing, but the the access token that is generated in a way that it matches some token or value which is generated within Okta. Okay, so let's walk through the first example out here. I'll go and put this API proxy in trace mode. Let's start a trace session. Okay, let's go over to my Postman client, and you can see that there are two endpoints. The first one out here is called the OAuth access token. This is the exact same endpoint that you can see out here, the OAuth ext. Okay, and then within the headers, I have certain common headers here. More importantly, I am sending in the grant type that I need. This is the user ID. I have created Postman variables so that I can hide what the user ID and password is. But within the environment in Postman, I have these variables referencing the real token, the real user ID for Okta and the real Okta password. Okay, so let's say let's first do the error condition. If I was to change something out here and hit a send, I have messed around with the password, so you can see that I should get a error message out here saying the user authentication failed, which is what we expected out here because I just entered an incorrect password. You can see we made a call out to Okta. Okta did not like the password, and then it threw an error condition. So we can see that this actually works. Let's go back out here and then I'll fire out the same request but with the right password, which is hidden here. And when I hit the send call, you can see that we actually got an access token back from Okta. An access token back from the Apigee token endpoint. We also got a refresh token along with some scope, but more importantly, what I'm doing out here is I'm returning some of the data back from Okta for you to be able to see that we indeed were able to get some data back from Okta. So let's go and examine what really happened in this example here. When I click on this request, you can see that a service caller was made to Okta as we would have imagined, and the request was successful. And more importantly, in this step, in the extract Okta user info, we are then extracting every single piece of data which got returned out here from Okta. You can see that in a successful call to Okta, we were able to get a lot of data back from there, including the expiration, the user ID of the specific user, some of the profile information, etc. Within this OAuth policy in the generate access token method, you can see that all the Okta information that's coming back is now coming back from Okta is actually now associated with the user token, okay, with the access token. And that's saved and within the Apigee store. However, when the response is sent back to the client, which is Postman in this case, we only send the access token. I'm just sending some of these attributes to be able to show that we can actually send data back from Okta and any other source. But in this case, none of the other relevant or sensitive information from Okta, including the session ID, the profile pieces, are returned. We only return the access token. So now let's go over to the employees API proxy, which is the protected API proxy, and put that in trace mode. Let's remember to select this access token here. Let's call the employees API proxy, and let's pass in the bearer token, and let's make a call out. So you saw that when I call the employees API, passing in the bearer token that we got, it was able to actually make an API call to the backend API and return the employee data set. If you hover over here and look at the employees API, only the access token was passed in, but when request came in here, you can see that all the pieces of information that we had stored and associated with that access token is automatically loaded and available for all of the policies within Apigee during that API proxy call. Those variables are available to be used. One of the things you can do in this case is that some of this information may be required by some of your backend services, in which case you can pass it along. So again, there's a lot of useful features built into the Apigee OAuth tooling. One of them is associating information with an access token and then loading it up at runtime. Okay, so let's go back to this piece here. I'm going to showcase the other variant. In the second variant, what's going to happen is the token is going to be minted by Apigee, but in this case, we are going to have the token value be something which Okta dictates out here. Essentially, it could be an Okta token that we can return as well. Okay, so let's go over to the OAuth ext2 policy to API proxy. And I want you to notice a few things in here. The first one of them is in the access token request, you can see I have a few more steps out here. So again, I call Okta the same way. Nothing changes out there. Here's the authentication endpoint. I pass in the exact same information. I also extract out some variables from Okta, very similar. In this case, however, what I'm trying to do out here is I'm trying to leverage a feature known as external authentication. So if I come out here into this OAuth policy out here, this is the Apigee documentation. You can see that it has a variety of different methods. In this case, you have the generate access token method. And within this, you can see that there is a external authorization element, right? And an external access token element. If I click on this, this is the variant that I'm showing you right now. In this case, if the external authorization and the external access token element is set to true, in this case, what we are normally saying is that we want the access token to be something which is generated by some other party. In this case, happens to be Okta. And in this case, specifically, I'm using the session ID token of Okta, right? But it could be any value. So out here, you specify which value, which variable, flow variable, that value is going to be coming in from, right? And when you say the external authorization is true, in which case, what happens is, instead of Apigee validating the client ID and client secret as it normally does when any authentication request is presented, we will rely on the third party, in this case Okta, to authorize this specific subject or the user, right? In this case, we don't require a client secret to be passed in. Okay, so let's go take a look at how you would do that within Apigee. So in this case, going back to the Edge UI, what I'm doing out here is one of the requirements for external authorization and setting an external access token is that you need to set a flag. It's called the OAuth external authorization status to true. Once you do that, within the access token policy itself, you will see that I'm referencing a variable, right? So I'm saying to the Apigee Edge policy, the OAuth 2 policy, that I want the token to be a value which is generated by and source the value from the session token. It could be anything, quite honestly. I'm also saying that the external authorization has to be set to true, right? So let's take a look at how exactly the authentication would work in this case. So I'm going to now place the trace2, the ext2, OAuth ext2 API proxy in trace mode. I'll go back to Postman. You can see in the first request that I made, the previous example, I had to pass in a client secret, right? Because the authorization is happening within Apigee. In this case, you can see that I'm calling a different endpoint, ext2, but I don't need to pass in the client secret, because by choosing the external authorization flag and setting it to true, you are indicating to Apigee Edge that just rely on the third party, in this case Okta, to be able to authorize this specific user. So we don't actually check the client ID in secret. The client ID is in there just for analytics purposes, but we don't actually check the client secret. Okay, so let me make a request from here. If I hit send, you can see that I get the access token back along with the refresh token. But if you notice, the access token looks a little bit different from the last time. It's not quite the same access token as what Apigee normally generates, which is a different kind of a string. So if I go back into the trace tool out here, you can see that we extracted some information out of Okta. We set the variable as we spoke about. This will let Apigee know that the external authorization was successful. And when it is, you can see that we are essentially setting the access token value of Apigee to the Okta session token, right? This is an example of how that you are minting a token within Apigee, but it is actually created somewhere else, and Apigee is merely sourcing the value from there. As always, you can see that Apigee is still associating other pieces of information with the token, but in this case, the access token that is generated is actually generated based on a value which is sourced from Okta. So you can see that the Apigee access token has now been set here. And if I was to go back to the employees API proxy, our trace session is still good. Let's go out there and now pass in this new. Here's the old header, as the old access token. You can see how different that is. And now I'm putting in the new access token here, which is admittedly a little bit longer and different. And when I call the employees API, you can see that it seamlessly works the way you would expect it to. Okay. And again, as if you were to go out here, look on the session, when the access token is presented, which is really the access token which was returned by Apigee, but it was generated by Okta, is honored the same way as the Apigee access token is honored. And the access token also then has all the associated information that we were able to persist with that using the custom attributes feature of the Apigee OAuth tooling. So again, just summarizing it, if I go back out here, we saw two different variations of this flow today. First, where Apigee is actually minting the access token, generating a random set of strings after successful authentication with Okta, and it generates the access token, sends the data back to the client, and in doing so, it also associates any such ID token or some other information coming from here with that access token. In the second variant that we saw, we essentially take the token from Okta and make that as our access token. So the token is essentially minted here, but we do generate that access token, but it is sourced from Okta, and then that gets returned back to the client, right? So you saw two different variations. within the OAuth capabilities of Apigee. And I would ask you to go to the OAuth documentation on the Apigee site. It has a lot of rich information and some sample examples on how to use these OAuth policies. Hope you found this useful. And again, till next time, I will let you guys have fun with OAuth. All right. Thanks for spending the time. And as always, if you have any kind of questions regarding OAuth, regarding password grant flow, integration with Okta, and with any other questions, please do visit the Apigee community at community.apigee.com. Thanks for your time.